What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
It started the same way it always does, me waking up, checking my phone out of habit, and pretending not to be disappointed when there's nothing waiting for me but a couple of promotional emails and a happy birthday from the bank message. Like somehow Wells Fargo gives more of a damn about me than my own family. I didn't expect much. Actually, that's a lie. I didn't expect anything. Not after the last 10 years of the same quiet, awkward realization that no one in my family remembers that the woman who always shows up on time, always buys the extra wine, always volunteers to pick up the cake or clean up afterward, was also born on this day. Not even a wrong time zone call or a late text. Nothing. But this year, the silence felt different. Not because it hurt more, it didn't. I'm past that part, but because I'd already decided weeks ago that I wasn't going to let it hurt me again. This year, I had a plan, and the absence of happy birthday messages only made what I was about to do feel more necessary, more deserved, and honestly, more delicious. Growing up, Josh was always the center of everything. He was the first to walk, the one who charmed the neighbors with his entrepreneurial spirit when he tried to sell them lemonade for $3 a cup at age 6, the one who made varsity football even though he mostly sat on the bench. And eventually the one who, despite a resume so light it could float, somehow still got handed the family pedestal every single year. It didn't matter what I did. Graduated college with honors? That's nice, Aaron, but Josh is thinking of starting a consulting firm. Got promoted to senior analyst at my firm before 35? Wow, honey, that's great, but Josh is considering launching a podcast. There was always something shinier, louder, and more interesting about him, and I spent far too long convincing myself that eventually, maybe after I paid off my student loans, or helped mom after her knee surgery, or babysat their damn dog while they went on a cruise, someone would remember me too. They never did. Last year was the final straw. It wasn't even about the missed birthday. That was expected at this point, but about how they threw Josh a 37th birthday gala in the backyard, complete with a signature cocktail menu and a professionally shot video highlight reel. All while I stood at the drink table mixing Manhattans because Whitney thought the bartender was too slow. At one point during that night, Dad put his arm around Josh, looked at the crowd like he was addressing the nation, and said, "We've always known this one was destined for great things." I stood 20 feet away, holding a tray of bruschetta I hadn't even been asked to bring, and something in me just quietly snapped. So when my bonus came through this year, quietly deposited into my account after a grueling Q4 where I carried a project that saved the company a mid-six-figure loss, I didn't tell a soul. Not my parents. Not Josh. Certainly not Whitney, who'd once asked me to read over her business plan for a kombucha candle line and then got offended when I corrected her math. No, I kept it for myself. It was a large number. Large enough to make me pause and reread it 3 times. The kind of number that shifts something in your chest. And instead of telling anyone, instead of even celebrating with friends or dinner or flowers, I sat on my couch that night with a cheap bottle of Prosecco and a Zillow tab open, typing in places I'd never dared to look before. The truth is, I'd been thinking about it for a while, what it might feel like to own something that belonged only to me, something that couldn't be dismissed or overshadowed or handed to Josh, because he's just having a hard time right now. A place where I didn't need to explain who I was or why I wasn't married or why I didn't show up to the last baby shower with hand-knitted booties. A space with walls that didn't echo the silence of a forgotten daughter. And I found it, about an hour outside Charleston, tucked near a quiet inlet with marshland on one side and the sea on the other, a modest 2-bedroom with peeling shutters and sunburnt siding, but a wraparound porch that practically whispered, "This is yours." I called the realtor the next morning. She was sweet, older, didn't ask questions about why I was buying a loan. I told her I wanted to see it in person and that I could pay in full, no mortgage. Her voice cracked a little when she heard that, like she didn't quite expect it from someone like me. But people rarely do. That's the thing about being overlooked for so long, you learn to move in silence, to build something under their noses without ever making a sound. I didn't tell anyone at work either. I showed up, ran my numbers, join meetings with the same neutral expression and one AirPod in while I listened to the sounds of Charleston's coastline on my phone beneath the table. I smiled when Josh posted his entrepreneurial journey update on LinkedIn. I clicked like. I even left a comment, "Proud of you, little brother." No one would have known that while he was talking about big dreams and venture capital, I was wiring a six-figure sum into escrow and buying my first piece of property outright. Quietly. Cleanly. No drama. And today, on my birthday, I woke up with a key on my nightstand. A real brass key. I held it in my hand for a long time, wondering what it would feel like to turn it in a door that opened to something I earned alone, without applause or expectation. My phone buzzed, another promotion from Uber Eats. Still nothing from my parents. Josh was probably on a brunch boat somewhere, popping bottles and telling strangers about a startup that doesn't exist yet. But I didn't feel sad. I felt calm. Like the silence wasn't emptiness anymore, but space. Space for something better. I got dressed, picked out a soft white robe I never wear, the one I bought years ago and always saved for something special, and I packed a bag. No one noticed. No one asked. I left town. I drove to the house. I stepped onto the porch, closed my eyes, and let the salt air wrap around me like a gift. And then, without a caption, without a birthday cake, without a single damn mention of why, I took a photo. Me, standing on my new porch in my robe, glass of champagne in hand. Sun in my face. A photo that said nothing and everything at once. And I posted it. Just one photo. And waited. 3 days before my birthday, while I was standing in my kitchen stirring a pot of lentil soup that had started to stick at the bottom, Whitney called me on FaceTime, unannounced as usual. Her face framed by one of those expensive ring lights that made everything behind her look sterile and curated, like she lived inside a catalog spread instead of a real apartment with actual dust and regrets. I almost didn't answer because I knew it wouldn't be about me. Whitney never calls about me. But something in me, a dark curiosity, maybe, or the sick enjoyment of hearing her pretend to be warm, made me press accept, and suddenly there she was, lips glossed, lashes curled, holding her phone at that upward angle influencers use to look ethereal and unreachable, as if gravity itself admired them. "Hey, girl," she chirped, drawing out the word like we'd ever shared secrets or matching tattoos. "So, I was just wondering, what are you doing for your birthday?" Her tone was syrupy, the kind that always left a residue, like she was playing nice, but calculating something beneath it, her mind scanning for holes in my schedule she could fill with her own agenda. I blinked. The spoon in my hand kept moving. For a second, I thought about saying the truth. I almost told her that I'd be driving 3 hours south to spend the weekend in a house with creaky floors, ocean-stained windows, and the smell of pine trees drifting through the cracks, that I planned to open the door, toss my phone onto the couch, and not speak to a single soul until Monday morning. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled, a tight, practice thing that I've perfected over years of family functions where I was the helper, the planner, the afterthought, and said, probably just working late. You know how it is. Deadlines. Whitney tilted her head, faint concern painting a shadow of emotion across her carefully moisturized forehead. "Oh, Erin, you really should do something for yourself. I mean, birthdays are, like, so important. They're a reflection of who we are. A celebration of life, right?" She grinned, her teeth unnaturally white. "Anyway, I was actually calling to see if you'd mind helping me with Josh's party again this year. You did such an amazing job last time. Everyone said the decorations were incredible." There it was. The real reason. Not concern. Not friendship. Logistics. Whitney didn't see me as a person with her own milestones or needs. I was a reliable cog in her glittery machine, the sister-in-law stand-in who knew where to buy discount roses and how to fold napkins into birds. I kept my tone even, nodded like I was flattered, and told her I'd see what I could do. She beamed, then pivoted into a story about their latest wine subscription box, something about notes of blueberry and rebellion, and I muted her halfway through, letting her monologue carry on while I scrubbed the bottom of the pot with a steel sponge and imagined what it would feel like to throw my phone out the window. After we hung up, I stared at the backsplash for a long time. My soup was ruined, burnt into a thick layer of resentment and passive compliance. I dumped it into the sink, rinsed the pot, and walked to my laptop. The listing was still open, the house by the inlet with the narrow path leading to the water, the crooked dock, and the wraparound porch that could hold a hammock, 2 chairs, and all the peace I had never been given. The realtor had emailed me again that morning. Still interested? Owners motivated to close fast. I clicked reply and typed 2 words, let's move. My fingers didn't hesitate. There was no second guessing. That weekend, I drove down to see the property in person. I didn't tell anyone. I wore sunglasses even though it was cloudy, turned the music up louder than necessary, and stopped halfway for gas station coffee and a sandwich that tasted like plastic and freedom. When I pulled into the gravel driveway and stepped out onto the wooden slats of the porch, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, not excitement exactly, but something sturdier, more grounded. Like a part of me that had been starved of oxygen was finally inhaling. The house wasn't perfect. There were patches of chipped paint, a screen door that didn't sit quite right, and a water heater that groaned like a dying animal, but it was mine. I could see it. Me. Alone. Reading. Cooking. Existing without the static of other people's expectations. The realtor, Linda, met me there, a soft-spoken woman in her 60s with a face full of laugh lines and zero pretense. She didn't comment on my single status or ask if I was buying it for the family. She walked me through the rooms, pointed out what had been updated and what hadn't, and told me, quietly, "You're the kind of person this house wants." We closed in less than a week. I paid in full. No financing. No questions. Just a wire transfer from a bonus I'd earned by showing up early, staying late, and fixing mistakes that meant 2 pay grades above me never even noticed they made. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Josh. I didn't tell Whitney. Let them plan another birthday bash for the family MVP. Let them toast him with top-shelf gin and custom hashtags. Let them talk about dreams and business ideas and potential. Meanwhile, I was making keys. Real keys. Brass and silver and mine. The day I picked them up from the lock shop, not some chain store, but a small place run by a man who looked like he hadn't updated his signage since the 90s, I held them in my palm for 10 minutes before sliding them into my purse. I wanted to remember what it felt like to possess something that no one had given me, no one could take away, and no one would ever see coming. At the next family dinner, a Sunday roast hosted by Josh and Whitney in their townhome, with vegan sides and linen napkins folded into roses, Whitney asked, loud enough for everyone to hear, "So Aaron, did you end up doing anything for your birthday?" I looked her dead in the eye, smiled faintly, and said, "Not much. Just stayed quiet." And in the deepest sense, it was the truest thing I'd ever said. If irony had a face, it would have been the one staring back at me in the full-length mirror the morning of Josh's birthday party, because there I was, curling my hair with extra care, dabbing a subtle pink gloss on my lips, and slipping into the same navy-wrapped dress I'd worn to 2 client presentations and 1 funeral, trying to look festive for a celebration that had absolutely nothing to do with me and everything to do with the person who had, yet again, effortlessly become the gravitational center of our family's attention. Whitney had sent out the invitations weeks in advance, meticulously designed with cursive gold font, a professionally staged photo of Josh at the marina, and the tagline, "A toast to his next big chapter." The words alone were enough to make my jaw tighten, not because my brother didn't deserve to celebrate, he did, in his own self-styled way, but because every year, no matter how directionless, unfinished, or dependent on borrowed money his life had become, our family rallied around him with a kind of blind, unconditional admiration usually reserved for child prodigies or decorated war heroes. And this year was no different. No one questioned the logic of throwing a lavish celebration for a man who had just quit his 3rd business venture in under 5 years. No one asked what, exactly, they were toasting. They just showed up with wine, applause, and freshly pressed clothing, while I brought ice, tablecloths, and the good serving spoons Mom had accidentally left at my place after Easter. By the time I arrived, The backyard was already buzzing with that brand of chaotic energy that always accompanies gatherings planned by people who delegate everything and then still manage to take all the credit. Whitney was running around in wedge heels, barking instructions at the caterer, trying to light candles that refused to stay upright in the wind, and snapping at the bartender who, apparently, was mixing the palomas too dry. When she saw me, her expression lit up with performative gratitude, the kind of over-the-top relief usually reserved for ambulances. And she handed me a clipboard with the schedule of events as if I were the event manager rather than her future sister-in-law. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I just took the damn clipboard and started doing what I've always done, making sure things ran smoothly while everyone else drank, laughed, and forgot how much effort it takes to keep a circus running behind the scenes. Josh, of course, looked completely at ease. He floated through the crowd in a tailored blazer over a white t-shirt, drink in hand, grin locked in place, telling stories that always made him sound smarter, bolder, and more successful than the truth ever allowed. At one point, he hugged me in front of a few of his college friends, people I hadn't seen since his wedding was called off 3 years ago, and said, "This is my big sister, Erin. She basically raised me." It was meant to sound charming, but I felt the bitterness crawl up my throat like acid. He didn't mean it maliciously. That's what made it worse. He actually thought it was a compliment. Later, during toasts, our dad stood at the head of the makeshift stage they'd built out of a few pallets and a rug, holding a glass of scotch. He hadn't stopped sipping since 3 in the afternoon. His speech, punctuated by laughter and the occasional hear, was a greatest hits compilation of Josh's milestones, from his second-place finish in middle school science fair to his bravery in leaving his job to pursue independent ventures. He called Josh a visionary, a builder, and, most nauseatingly, the kind of man the world needs more of. When he looked over at me during the final line, "We couldn't be prouder of this guy," I held his gaze, smiled tightly, and took another sip of wine, though the taste had long since turned to metal in my mouth. No one mentioned me. No one said I had planned the timeline, fixed the broken string lights, replaced the centerpiece flowers Whitney had forgotten to refrigerate. No one noticed that I hadn't eaten, that I'd spent 3 hours on my feet managing vendors, or that I hadn't spoken to anyone about myself all evening. I could have vanished into the pool, fully clothed, and it would have taken at least 10 minutes before someone asked where I went, and even then, it would have been to find out who had the guest list. I left the party just after 11, having stacked chairs, thrown away soggy napkins, and taken the trash to the bins out front. Whitney gave me a parting hug, air-kissed the space next to my cheek, and said, "Seriously, Erin, I don't know how we'd do this without you. You're such a rock." And as she flitted back to the fire pit with her wine glass, I stood there, watching them all bask in the glow of their chosen center, and realized something sharp and definitive. I didn't want to be a rock anymore. Rocks get stepped on. Rocks get placed where others want them. Rocks don't move. But I could. I already had. When I got home, still in the navy dress, I turned on the porch light, sat on the edge of the sofa, and pulled up the photo I'd taken earlier that day, a test shot, really, just to see the lighting at the house. It wasn't meant to be dramatic. Just me barefoot in a robe, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't even sipped, the ocean beyond the railing a blur of blues and greens under the late sun. I looked relaxed. I looked whole. I looked like someone whose story didn't need a supporting cast to be complete. And then I posted it. No caption. No geotag. No explanation. Just the image. It went up on my Facebook and Instagram, places I rarely touch unless someone dies or gets married, and within minutes, the likes began trickling in, polite at first, then curious, then frantic. I didn't respond. I didn't watch. I turned my phone face down, poured myself another drink, this time something good, something aged, something I'd bought for myself without asking, and I sat there, legs curled under me, thinking not about what they would say, but how long it would take before the questions started. Because nothing unsettles the people who always thought they had you figured out more than realizing you've done something big, something bold, and you didn't feel the need to tell them first. The first ping came just after 6:30 the next morning, long before I was ready to rejoin the digital world. And definitely before my coffee had brewed or the daylight had begun softening the hard edges of the morning sky through the slatted blinds in my kitchen. It was Whitney, of course, the self-appointed monarch of every family thread, typing in that overly excited tone she uses when she's trying to pretend she isn't panicking but desperately needs to establish control. OMG. Where is this? The excessive punctuation, the feigned astonishment, the way she capitalized IS like she had just stumbled across a tabloid leak rather than a photo of me in a robe holding a champagne flute, it all screamed one thing. She didn't know what to do with the fact that I had posted something beautiful, luxurious, and unexpected without giving her any warning, any access, or any clue. I let it sit there. I didn't open the message. I didn't tap the preview. I watched it glow and then fade on the lock screen like a match sputtering out in the dark. An hour later, Josh chimed in, far less performative, but even more revealing in its bluntness. His message, sent to the family group chat, not a private text, simply read, "Wait, did I miss something?" Which, given the context of the past 3 decades of my life, felt less like a question and more like a confession. He had missed something. He had missed a lot of things: birthdays, conversations, quiet disappointments swallowed with polite smiles, and the rising heat of long-standing resentment that burns hottest when left to simmer unnoticed for years. My mother followed shortly after. Always the one to slide into the conversation with a tone that tried to be neutral, but carried the thinly veiled judgment of someone who had long decided what her daughter's life should look like and now couldn't quite make sense of the fact that I was living something entirely different. "You were just at Josh's party a few days ago. When did you go to the beach?" she asked, as if logistics were the point. As if the real question wasn't why her daughter had made a major life decision without consulting her, but why the timeline didn't fit into the neat little boxes she preferred to keep my life in. Still, I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled on a sweater, stepped out onto my own porch, my actual porch, not the metaphorical one I'd occupied for so many years as the quiet supporter, the stable background character, and I let the cold morning air wrap around me like a second skin. The sea, just visible beyond the trees, glimmered with the kind of indifference I've grown to admire. The waves didn't care who had remembered my birthday or who hadn't. They didn't measure worth in party invitations or champagne toasts or family accolades. The phone kept buzzing. There were follow-up messages from Whitney, rapid, anxious, unpunctuated. "Wait, did you buy this? Is it like a rental or are you staying there?" Then one from my father, shorter, heavier, "Is everything okay?" As if the only explanation for me owning something independently must be rooted in crisis. As if joy, ambition, and silence were signs of instability when they came from me. By the afternoon, the group chat had splintered. I saw that Whitney had posted a quote on her Instagram story, one of those pastel graphics with serif font, that read, "Money can't buy class, and silence isn't strength when it's spite." The kind of thing that's meant to look empowering, but is really just a digital slap wearing lipstick. I didn't screenshot it. I didn't respond. Let her have her poetic tantrum. Later that evening, my mother sent a direct message separate from the group thread, as if the family chat had become too public for the kind of conversation she now wanted to have. "It just would have been nice to know. You could have invited us. Your father and I would have loved to celebrate with you." The words hung there on the screen, and for a moment, I stared at them not with anger, but with the kind of exhausted amusement that comes from watching someone rewrite a story you've already lived 100 times over. They would have loved to celebrate with me? When? Before or after they forgot again? During or after Josh's toast? No. This wasn't about being excluded. This was about no longer being able to control the narrative. About me making a move that wasn't up for discussion, debate, or dilution. And just when I thought the fire had dimmed, it flared again. Josh finally texted me directly, breaking the silent spiral that had wound around us since the party. "Did you buy that place?" That was all he wrote. No question mark. No pleasantries. Just that simple line, heavy with tension and unspoken questions. I stared at it for a while. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to feel the weight of answering honestly without apology. So I typed, "Yes." then paused, then typed again, and I did it without asking permission. Imagine that. And with that, I turned off the phone, placed it face down on the table beside me, poured a second glass of wine, something rich and dry with notes of cherry and the faintest trace of rebellion, and I let the moment settle into my bones like warmth. For the first time in a long time, they didn't know what I was doing. They didn't know how I'd done it. And, more importantly, they didn't know what I would do next. Let them stew. Let them theorize, spin stories, speculate about my motivations. Because silence isn't emptiness. Silence, when it's chosen, when it's earned, when it's held with intention, is power. The house didn't creak the way I expected it to, not like the brittle, tired homes you see in movies that carry the weight of past lives in their bones, but more like something stretching awake for the first time, a kind of slow, structural exhale that made me feel, almost unnervingly, like I hadn't just bought a piece of real estate, but taken possession of a presence. I'd packed lightly, just enough for the long weekend, a few paperbacks I never seemed to finish, a bottle of aged red I'd been saving for a special occasion I had stopped believing would come, and a robe that felt too luxurious for my daily life, but entirely appropriate here, in a space that owed nothing to anyone. It was early evening when I arrived, the kind of light that slides sideways through the trees and paints everything gold, as if the world itself is exhaling after pretending to be sharp all day. I set my bag down just inside the door, didn't bother unpacking, and opened the windows wide to let the air flood in, that damp, coastal kind of breeze that smells faintly of old wood, seaweed, and whatever salt-crusted dreams had died nearby. I didn't check messages. I didn't connect to Wi-Fi. I didn't tell anyone I'd arrived safely. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I didn't feel the need to reassure or report or explain. That night, I sat on the porch in silence, the kind that doesn't press in but expands, and I watched the light go out on the water in layers, first the glare, then the glimmer, then finally the shape itself, until all that remained was sound, soft and irregular, like a heartbeat you've only just begun to notice. I thought about all the birthdays that had come before, the silent ones, the forgotten ones, the ones where I made excuses for other people's neglect, wrapped indifference in the language of busyness or confusion or simple forgetfulness. And I let myself mourn them, just a little, just enough to make space for something better. I thought about the year Mom called me a day late, saying she was off by 1 because she'd remembered my due date instead of the actual day I was born, and how I had laughed and reassured her, brushing off the hurt with the same polish I always used to hide the bruise. But I wasn't bruised anymore. And maybe that was the thing that rattled them most. Because this time, there was no outburst, no tearful call demanding to know why they didn't remember, no passive-aggressive silence meant to punish them into reflection. This time, I simply stepped away. And in doing so, I had taken with me the version of myself they had depended on, the good daughter, the dependable sister, the self-sacrificing background figure who never asked for more than scraps and always smiled as if they were a feast. The messages continued to pile up, though I didn't check them until Sunday evening. My mother had sent a long one full of the usual curlicues of guilt disguised as concern. Phrases like, "We just wish you would have told us," and "It hurts to feel shut out," as though the years of exclusion, the empty chairs at my birthdays, the annual priority list that always put Josh at the top and me somewhere below the dessert table, hadn't happened. She ended with, "Family should stick together," a line so rehearsed and hollow that I almost laughed. There was something almost satisfying in their confusion, not spiteful, not malicious, but clear, like a fog finally lifting after years of pretending the weather wasn't ruining the view. They didn't understand who I had become, and maybe they never would. And that was fine. Because I did. The moment that crystallized, it wasn't loud, wasn't cinematic, but it was definitive. Late Sunday morning, there was a knock on the door, soft, tentative, the kind that doesn't expect to be welcomed. I paused, not out of fear, but curiosity, and when I opened it, there she was, Whitney, standing there in her oversized sunglasses, clutching a box of pastries that looked more curated than baked, and offering a smile that didn't reach the corners of her mouth. She didn't wait for an invitation. She launched into her monologue like a performer who had been rehearsing backstage, something about how she and Josh were worried, how this all felt so sudden, how they were just trying to understand. She asked, not quite directly, whether I was angry or sad or trying to make a statement. She said it like she was extending a hand, but what she really wanted was to reassert the boundary, to return me to the place they'd assigned me, helpful, harmless, forgettable. I nodded as she spoke. I let her finish. Then I looked at the pastries, took a slow breath, and said, "Thanks for stopping by," as gently and firmly as I could. And before she could respond, before she could step inside or shift the tone or push her foot into the closing door, I pulled it shut softly, cleanly, without drama or finality. Just enough to say, "This space is mine." Inside, the silence returned, not empty this time, but full of decisions made, of paths taken, of rooms that would never echo with someone else's expectations. I poured a glass of wine, opened a window, and sat on the floor with my legs stretched out, watching the breeze play with the edge of the curtain like a cat pawing at a dream. Later that evening, when the sun dipped below the tree line and the house grew still enough to hear the water against the dock, I opened my laptop, not to reply to anyone, not to explain, but to check something, and there it was, sitting at the top of my inbox. Another email from the firm. A second bonus. Bigger than the first. An adjustment due to a restructuring I hadn't even been aware of, retroactive to the previous fiscal year and effective immediately. I didn't react, not in the way they would expect. No gasp, no rush to share, no celebratory call to someone who would mistake it for luck. I just stared at the number, then whispered to myself, next year, maybe I'll buy the one on the cliff. And that was it. No fireworks. No party. No applause. Just me. Quiet. Whole. Free. The birthday they'll never forget started with them forgetting again. And it ended with me remembering myself.